Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome, my dear faves, to the second part of What If Female Naruto Was the Older Sister to the Elric Brothers. Credit goes to Blood Pokemon 101 for this fantastic fanfic. Chapter 4. A Siblings Reunion. Yo, Ed, Al. Long time no see, Datbayo. Edward and Alphonse just stared wide-eyed and slack-jawed as if they were seeing a ghost. Was it her? The sunny, blonde hair, the sun-kissed skin, those indistinguishable whisker marks on each side of her face. And that awfully familiar verbal tic. There was only one person the brothers knew who would have those types of markings. No doubt about. It really was her. Naruko was back. Sister. Al's trembling called out to her, flabbergasted and apprehensively, as if he was afraid that if he called her, she might disappear again like 10 years ago. If he had a heartbeat, it'd be thumping so wildly in his chest, he would be able to hear it pounding loudly against his ear. Well. What are doing there, standing like a couple of idiots? Come on and greet your older sister. Naruko shouted, cheerfully, a bright grin on her face, ignoring the Fullmetal's bodyguard's shocked stutters. Alphonse immediately took the initiative and rushed down towards his sister, pulling her into a bone-crushing hug. Edward, on the other hand, made no attempt to move. He glared down, hatefully at Naruko, his face set into a deep, angry scowl. What was she doing here? He watched as Al talked animatedly as an animated suit of armor could with her, asking her questions after questions. Ed, however, didn't feel the same jubilant happiness at being reunited with Naruko. He marched down the stairs, golden eyes full of contempt. Edward. Naruko called, happily once she saw him approaching them. The Fullmetal Alchemist sneered and viciously shrugged away her attempts to hug him. Is that any way to treat your elder sibling, you little brat? Naruko pouted. Ed's face immediately turned an angry red as tick marks spread across his face. Who the hell are you calling little? Exclamation mark. He launched at Naruko, trying to punch her face in. She casually sidestepped his attempt though, and watched with amusement as he unceremoniously fell against the pavement. Still Ed's trigger word. Naruko asked her youngest brother. Yep, Al replied with a sigh. Anyway, Al, she stared up at him, bright blue eyes taking in his armored form. Why are you dressed in a suit of armor? Quote. Al seemed to fidget nervously under his older sister's scrutinizing gaze. Oh, it's comfortably, he replied, lamely. A slender, blonde eyebrow rose. Is that so? Blue eyes scanned his tall, well-built armored features. You've gotten so tall. She sent a pointed look towards her other brother's way. Edward. How could you allow yourself to be so much shorter than Alphonse? Quote. Edward fumed from his spot on the ground. Shut up. He yelled, indignantly. Al chuckled a bit. Anyway, sister, where have you been all this time? Quote. Naruko nervously scratched the back of her head. How would she explain this to her brothers? She debated whether to give the same excuse she gave to Winry. However, she knew Ed and Al would not be satisfied with that. They would try to poke holes in her story, especially Edward. He would ask questions after questions until he was completely and utterly satisfied. Why are you even here? Edward snarled. Naruko ignored his contemptuous tone, and frowned at him. What? A girl can't visit her younger brothers? A gaze softened. I promised I would, didn't I? Quote. Ed's temper immediately flared, an angry growl escaping from his mouth, lips pulled back into a vicious snarl, ready to rip her a new one. Yeah, 10 years ago. You didn't bother to show up for Mom's funeral. Quote. Brother. Alphonse softly reprimanded him, keeping him from attacking their sister out of spite. Edward was glaring at her with so much detest and anger, but she could see it. The pain swelling deep within his molten golden orbs. It was easy to spot it after going through so much pain herself. Although she couldn't see Alphonse's face because of his helmet, his body was practically oozing with hurt and sorrow. Naruko casted her cerulean blue eyes away from her brother's gazes, an overwhelming amount of guilt gnawing at her heart. I'm sorry, she apologized, weakly. She inwardly flinched as more guilt ate away at her because, right now, she refused to tell them the truth. The Uzumaki bravely met her brother's piercing and pleading stares. She took in a deep breath. She offered a lopsided smile, trying to ease the tension. What can I say? I got lost on the path of life. She knew she gave such an Kakashi-like answer, but it was the vague truth. The truth without the details. In judging by expressions on Ed's and Al's faces, they weren't the least bit satisfied. What the fuck? Exclamation mark. Edward yelled with both rage and disapproval in his voice. His voice was so loud, everyone except Alphonse had to momentarily cover their ears. A small crowd was beginning to gather. You've been gone for 10 years, 10 goddamn years, and that's all you could say. Exclamation mark. Quote. Ignoring the crowd of noisy people, Naruko locked her onto Edward's furiously trembling form. It was taken every ounce of his willpower not to pounce on her, she could tell. What do you expect me to say? She argued back, however, her voice was awfully quiet, subconsciously placing a hand on her stomach. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't change the fact that I left, Dad left, and Mom's dead. Nothing I say changes the past, Edward. With the same hand, Naruko reached out towards him, but quickly retracted it back. Why you probably wouldn't want me doing that anymore, she whispered, dejectedly. Ed could feel the last of his restraint snapping. He was about to offer an angry retort until Al's panicked gasp cut him off. Sister. Your hand. Quote. Naruko raised a confused eyebrow before a sudden realization dawned on her. Edward turned his gaze towards Alphonse with a look of puzzlement before turning his attention at Al's source of worry. His attention was immediately to something he was not expecting, Naruko's bandaged right hand. What happened to your hand? Ed asked, plain and simple, more out of curiosity than anything. He tried to keep the concern and worry from his tone, remembering that this was the sister that left. In his opinion, she didn't deserve his sympathy. She racked her brain for a believable, something that would sat Ed's curiosity and Al's worry. My hand got burned in a house that caught on fire, saving children. Naruko didn't know whether to flinch or pat herself on the back. The excuse was something would do. In fact, she's done a few times during her career as a shinobi. But she's never gotten injured in a house fire. That would be really pathetic of her. That's horrible. Alphonse's frantic voice pierced through the air. He marched up her, taking in bandaged hand. You should have a doctor look at it. No. The Uzumaki quickly retracted her hand out of reflex. She knew if she went to the hospital they would try to take off the bandage, or get her to do it thanks to the seals, and reveal the pale prosthetic underneath. Quickly realizing her mistake, she reiterated. I mean, a doctor had already seen it. She quickly decided to change the subject upon noticing Edward's scrutinizing eyes. He was definitely suspicious. What are you guys doing in Central? She asked. Why aren't you back home with Winry and Granny Pinako? Quote. A foreboding sense of pain, sadness, and regret flooded through the air. None of your damn business. Edward sighed, bitingly. With that, he turned on his heels and angrily stomped away. He faintly heard his brother's cries of, wait up. Single quote dot. He just had to get away from her. She made him sick to his stomach. The mere sight of her repulses him. Naruko watched sadly as her brother walked away from her. She saw the two bodyguards giving her minor looks of pity before following after them, but she was hardly paying any attention to them. Hell, she doesn't even know their names. All she could say was that her reunion with Ed and Al went better than she thought. Of course it was far from perfect, on the complete opposite side of a perfect, happy reunion, but a happy reunion wasn't really what she was expecting anyway. She just thought there would be shouting, more yelling, and wayward fists thrown here and there. She was more than prepared to let Edward get one free shot at her, even she could easily dodge it, if it would help placate his anger just a tiny bit. After all, Alphonse had been more or less forgiving towards her. Edward, on the other hand, was obviously not. Naruko smiled, wryly. Well, Ed was one to hold grudges, unlike Al. She glanced up at the clear, blue sky. She was prepared for the work that was ahead, but she was expecting nothing less. She's been through a lot, Sasuke's betrayal, the Akatsuki, the Fourth Great War. She didn't give up then, and there's no way she's giving up now. Or her name's not Naruko Uzumaki. Edward furiously stomped down the street. He could hear the sound of metal hitting the pavement, meaning his little brother was following him, accidentally bumping into pedestrians if his hurried cries of, I'm sorry, were any indication, but he paid it no mind. The nerve of her, the arrogance of her, showing up unannounced. As if she had any right. Who the hell does she think she is? Exclamation mark. Edward found an empty bench plopped down on it, posture slouched, arms crossed, and a deep scowl on his face. Alphonse sighed in relief when he saw his older brother finally stop to sit down and take a break from his aimless walking. He quietly took a seat next to him. Neither brother spoke, not knowing what to say. Their sister was back. After 10 long, agonizing years, she'd returned. A sister that left without reason, who had never made any contact with them, not so much as a single letter. Now, she came back just as mysteriously as she had left, and Ed and Al didn't know what to make of this. How were they supposed to interact with her? How would she react to the fact that one of her brothers has a metal right arm and left leg, and the other doesn't even have a body? What would she say? Should they tell her? Tell her that they committed the ultimate taboo known to alchemists? No. Edward thought, vehemently. He fisted his hands into his pant leg. She wasn't there for any of it. She doesn't know the suffering Al and I went through. The hell Al and I are still going through. She left us, she wasn't there for any of it. Quote. Alphonse glanced at his older in worry. Brother. Edward let out a deep sigh to calm his nerves, knowing he was worrying his little brother. You know, Al, this, he gestured to his arm. Quote. Doesn't change anything. I know, Al whispered, quietly, knowing what Ed meant. There was a moment of silence before Ed spoke again. "I'm not forgiving her," he declared through clenched teeth. The suit of armor remained silent. "Don't forget, Al, Naruko wasn't there." The elder Elric spoke as if to remind his younger brother that Naruko was not with them when they committed human transmutation. That she had left them. She created a hole in the family that never went away. Al contemplated his next words, knowing the wrong choice of words would set Ed off. He could understand Ed's anger and resentment. Hell, he had the same such sentiments, but he really missed his sister, and was incredibly to see her alive and well after all these years. He wanted nothing more than to talk to her, and reminisce about the past and what they've both been up to for the past decade. "Ed, she's family," Alphonse replied, tentatively, "a few minutes." Edward pretended not to hear him, and he stood up from the bench. Al sighed. "Where are you going?" Quote, "To the library," was the somewhat angry response her got. A week after, Ed and Al found out the awful truth. The deep-rooted, unfathomable, dark truth about the Philosopher's Stone. The one hope they had of returning their bodies back to normal. The Philosopher's Stone needed the sacrifice of thousands of human lives. There was no way Edward and Alphonse would be able to sacrifice countless people's lives just so they could return to normal. It incredibly morally wrong, and this was their problem, no one else's. They made a vow not to get others too involved in their affairs. Edward, disheartened, reached his hand towards the ceiling fan. "You know, I think this is God's way of mocking us. We made a mistake as little kids and he still has a grudge against us." They heard a knock on the door. "Ed, Al, are you in there? Come on out. I brought dinner." They immediately recognized the voice of their older sister. Edward glared at the door as if he wanted to burn a hole through it. Alphonse glanced between the door and his brother, unsurely, as if contemplating whether to open it or not. "What do we do, brother?" Al asked. Ed scoffed, turning away from the door. "Just ignore her." Quote. The knocking became louder. "Ed. Al. Open up." Quote. "Damn it." The Fullmetal Alchemist shouted at the door. "This has nothing to do with a stupid, washout hag like you." Quote. Al gasped, horrified. "Brother. You shouldn't say that about sister." Quote. Edward snorted, but before he could respond, the door suddenly flew over their heads, startling the two boys. Ed and Al glanced over, only to be incredibly terrified as they were greeted by a creature they would only see in their worst nightmares. Her long, blonde hair was whooshing wildly around her, her blue eyes glowed with murderous intent, her lips were stretched into a sadistic smirk, and there was a violently ominous aura hovering around her. Edward and Alphonse haven't been this terrified since training with their teacher. They have to wonder if all women are this scary. "Who the fuck do you think you're talking to, Edward?" Naruko growled out, daring Ed to answer, promising a whole world of pain if he answers wrong. "Nothing." Alphonse quickly and frantically answered for his older brother. "He didn't mean it, sister. We've been under a lot of stress lately. You know how Ed gets when things don't go easy for him." He let out a nervous laugh. Naruko thought this over as her blue eyes scanned the both of them. She sighed, softly, letting her anger and rage dissipated. "Well, here's your dinner." She handed the lunch box over to Alphonse. "I heard you guys haven't eaten in days. That's not good." She and Al went over to the dining table to set the food she made down. "Ed, come eat," Naruko beckoned him. Edward glared at her for a bit, getting ready to tell her off until his stomach grumbled at the sight of chicken and rice that set out on the table. Unable to ignore his growing hunger, especially when there was food laid out before him, mocking him, he grumpily stalked towards the table. "Who's going to fix the door?" he questioned, eyeing the broken door near the kitchen. "You are, Ed. You can just fix it with alchemy," Naruko answered, dismissively. "Oh, how very convenient for you," the blonde boy said, sarcastically. Dinner was awkwardly quiet for the three siblings. Naruko tried to make small talk to cut the tension, but only Alphonse was willing to communicate with her. Edward was trying his best to ignore her, already making up his mind to having as little to do with her as possible. That made the eldest sibling a little sad, but she wasn't one to give up so easily. Although, through her observations, she noticed something very important during dinner and decided to voice it. "Why aren't you eating, Al?" Quote. Ed and Al immediately went pale, fumbling for a proper excuse. I'm just no hungry, sister," Alphonse answered, hurriedly. "I already ate before." Quote. Naruko let out a disappointed sigh. "Please don't lie to me, Alphonse. I know that's impossible since you don't have a body," she stated, matter-of-factly. Her younger brothers instantly went slack-jawed. Not only because she already Al's condition, but the nonchalantly way she said it as if it was no big deal. How did you know?" Al asked, hesitantly. Ed was still too stunned to say anything. "By the sound of your footsteps and your voice," she answered, simply. "It's way too hollow. And besides, what do you think the first thing I did when I came back? I went by our house, only to see burned down to a crisp." She let out a deep breath, waiting for what to happen after she spoke the next few words. "I know that you guys performed human transmutation." Alphonse let out a loud, horrified gasp and Edward furiously slammed his hands on the table, Naruko distinctively hearing the sound of metal clanging against the surface. "What right do you have to be snooping around?" Exclamation mark. Edward shouted at her, his face contorted into one of pure anger. "I have the right to know why my old home is no longer there," Naruko replied, calmly. As the eldest sibling with more experience than her two brothers combined in these types of situations, it wouldn't do her any good to lose her temper. She had reasoned with herself earlier to try to approach her little brothers in a calm and mature manner, given that she had more worldwide experience than the both of them. Compared to her, they were still just children, after all. "Sister, you don't seem to be that disappointed or mad at us," Al observed. Naruko shrugged her shoulders. "Honestly, I'm a little disappointed, but meh. You guys could have turned out a lot worse. I mean, you guys could have become mad scientists obsessed with immortality and performing creepy human experimentations. Psychopaths obsessed with revenge. Or developed a god complex, trying to take over the world. Maybe even create a super weapon, and start an international war." Edward and Alphonse just started at her, dumbfounded and confused at the list off all the worst possible outcomes she could think of. What they didn't know was the fact that she was listing off all the villains she's met while was gone. "So, basically, you thought we would turn into a couple of criminals and murderers," Ed confirmed with a twitch of his eyebrow. Naruko nodded her head. "I was ready to beat some sense into you guys, if that happened." Edward grinded his teeth together. "Well, not if it would have happened if you haven't abandoned us." He shot out, furiously, all deep-seated bitterness he had for her, lashing out all at once. "Where have you been all this time? Exclamation mark. Why did you leave? Exclamation mark." Quote. Naruko stared at her younger brother, sadly for a second, noting the pain hidden underneath his angered, golden eyes. I'm sorry. I know that I'm partly to blame for the way things turned out. She glanced over to Ed, calmly as if staring at a child throwing a temper tantrum. But like said before, Edward, nothing I'd say would change the past. We are all going to have to learn to just deal with it. Ed let out a forced, uneasy laugh. Deal with it. Deal with it, you say. That's easy for you to say. You have no idea of the suffering Al and I went through. Quote. What you're saying sounds like an excuse, Edward, Naruko retorted, cutting him off, her cerulean blue eyes piercing through him. Are you really trying to blame me for your actions? I'd admit that it was my fault that you guys had to go through such desperate times at such a young age, but take some responsibility for your actions, Ed, instead of trying to pin the blame on others. Naruko let out an exasperated breath. Mistakes aren't made so that a person would grow arrogant and conceited because of it. Mistakes are made to teach humility and appreciation for life. To help mature a person to learn from the past and to pass on their experiences to the next generation. Edward, it's clear to me that you haven't learned anything from your mistakes. In fact, just listening to you now, it seems that you have grown even more arrogant and self-absorbed because of it, and that's where I'm very disappointed. She stood up from the table, already finished with her meal. Until you learn that, there's no way I could tell you guys anything. Sister, Alphonse spoke, sadly, feeling her disappointment weighing down on him. The blonde woman stopped by the torn-down doorway. If the path you walk is no longer available, then find another path. If you can't find any, then just create your own. Use your own powers and knowledge to create a path for you to walk across, even if you have to create it out of nothing. She stayed silent for a second, a small smile tugging at her lips. I'm not worried, at all. You guys would get your bodies back. I do believe in you. The blonde Uzumaki walked out the door, not waiting to see the reactions of the affect her words had on her two naive, idiotic brothers. Right now, she had other matters to attend to. When she was using sage jutsu to locate her brothers, she noticed various amount of ominous presence around the city, most notably coming from underneath it. She figured it was time to check out what was hiding underground. If things gets out of hand, maybe she would contact Kakashi-sensei to extend her stay. After all, she didn't want harm to come to Edward and Alphonse. She would absolutely make sure that all threats were eradicated for the brothers' safety. That's her job as the eldest sibling. Chapter 5. Hospital Willies. Sitting meditatively on the roof, Naruko began drawing in nature energy. It was completely dark out, only the street lamps and the crescent moon served as light sources, so she was pretty hard to spot when one wasn't looking for her. Her objective was fairly simple. Find the source of that ominous presence, beat the hell out of it, and keep it from potentially harming her dear, little brothers. Quite simple, really. The only catch was trying not to draw attention to herself. She didn't want civilians or the police raiding the area and thus getting in her way. Plus, the fact she did not want her brothers finding out that she's a trained kunoichi in the art of assassination, infiltration, and espionage. That would involve explaining her past, and the blonde woman was not ready to hit that road with her two innocent brothers, who haven't seen as much blood and death as she had. This was more of a reconnaissance self-assigned mission than anything else. If it doesn't look like she'd be able to silently defeat the mysterious entity, the Uzumaki woman would get out of there as quickly as possible and contact Kakashi-sensei, so that she could stay long enough to deal with the problem. Naruko smirked when she felt herself entering sage mode. You know, it would have been much easier if you just went into tailed beast mode, Kurama spoke out. I can't do that, Kurama, Naruko argued. The glow and transformation would attract too much attention. With their brief conversation coming to an end, the female Uzumaki raced off to the source of the evil aura. Getting close towards the sewers of Central was fairly easy. She was expecting to be ambushed or something for getting too close to this creature's territory. However, no one made any attempts to attack her. At least, not yet. Naruko's questions and concerns were answered when, not even a few feet into the entrance of Central's underground pathway, she was immediately attacked by shadowy tendrils. She immediately jumped out of the way. Hey, I knew something fishy was going on, she grinned to herself. The dark, deadly spears made another attempt to skewer her once again. In response, the blonde woman quickly pulled out a kunai from her pouch, and sliced through a few of the tentacles. Naruko. Behind you. Kurama quickly warned his host. Naruko twisted her body around to grab at one of the tentacles that were trying to pierce her from behind. What interesting, little human you are. A sinister voice resonated throughout the area. She couldn't tell whether the monster sounded intrigued or annoyed that its attempts to kill her were failing. It was apparent that it actually never met a human that could fight back. Its attacks began even more ferocious and vicious as it tried spearing in different areas. It was apparent that the creature was very adamant about not letting her venture any further. It was funny. As the battle raged on, Naruko noticed that the monster used shadows to attack. It was similar to the Nara clan's shadow possession jutsu. However, while their jutsu were usually used to immobilize enemies, this monster's attacks were clearly meant to be used offensively and for assassinations. And in this narrow alleyway, it was hard for blonde Uzumaki to counterattack. The monster definitely had the advantage here. She dodged another strike by backflipping against the wall. Maybe she should make a retreat before someone starts to hear all the ruckus the battle is making, and start to rush over to investigate. Don't want her cover to be blown. Yet. Got you. She heard the monster squeal in cruel delight as a couple of tentacles pierced through her midsection. She coughed out a bit of blood before a sly smirk graced her lips. In an instant, her body was replaced with that of a steel pole. From up on the roof, Naruko could hear the creature's yells of shock, dismay, and frustration. Huh. She bet it has never seen a substitution jutsu before. Well, as much as she wanted to stick around, there was no use staying if she didn't know where the creature's true form lay. It was awfully determined not to let her go any further, nor to see what it really looks like. Besides, she needed to get her rest. Been kind of a long day. Seeing her brothers again, mentally exhausted her, but in a good way. At least, two things were confirmed for the female Uzumaki. 1. There were monsters lurking about, dangers that were threat to her precious, little brothers. And that 2, they seem be able know quite a bit about how humans interact, basing on how smug the tentacle creature was when it thought she was just a normal human woman, meaning that the people of Amestris are either oblivious to them, or that they blend in so well with humans, which means they are monsters in human-shaped form. There are many possibilities lurking around in Naruko's head. However, if it really was the latter, and they have made contact with humans and are free to be viciously hostile and to kill humans without a second thought while roaming the streets without a care in the world, then this may be a bigger problem than she expected. It would be obvious that somebody or some people were in league with these monsters. In other words, in the worst-case scenario, there may very well be a conspiracy going on. Naruko let out an irritated sigh as she slumped against the wall of empty apartment building she sneak in. Fucking more trouble. And all she wanted to do was to relax and spend time with Ed and Al for the next month. She didn't know her vacation would actually turn into a fucking mission. Guess, she'll contact Kakashi-sensei to extend her stay indefinitely until her new mission is cleared. At least on the bright side, that means Naruko would spend more time with Edward and Alphonse. So, it wasn't a total loss. She let out a breathless sigh. But how long could she keep her secret from them? Ed was in the hospital. Ed was in the hospital. Ed was in the fucking hospital. Of all the... Just what the fuck happened in one night? Exclamation mark. Just wait until she gets her hands on those two idiot brothers of her. What reckless stunt did those morons pull this time? Naruko angrily raced down the hall towards her brother's room, which she got from the receptionist. She twisted around patience and swiveled across corners, being as agile as a cat. When she spotted Edward's bodyguards, she knew she was in the right room. Out of politeness, the blonde Uzumaki gave a short bow towards them. They gave her awkward looks and hand gestures in return. Naruko couldn't blame them for feeling slightly nervous and uneasy, not after having a front row seat to witness their family drama. They probably didn't know how to talk to her, or if they should be talking to her in the first place. The blonde woman then heard a man inside the room made a comment about Edward dating Winry. She had to hold back a snort when her little brother indignantly denied being attracted to his mechanic. Man. She couldn't miss an opportunity like this. Seeing Edward all flustered and embarrassed. She just got to make him even more flustered. So she did the only thing she could think of. Run in the room and proclaim something so embarrassing to young boys who are in the midst of puberty. Edward. Naruko's voice held a serious and stern tone, heavily contrasting the giddiness and impishness she was feeling inside. Make sure to use protection. She was always known to be as mischievous as a fox. Seeing Ed comically collapse and turn as white as a ghost was pure gold. Although, seeing Winry's beet red face made her feel a little guilty. Sorry, Winry. Naruko mentally promised to make it up to her. She could hear the two guards outside let out flabbergasted gasps. Score. She was officially successful in traumatizing Ed for life. That's what he gets for worrying her. The best pranks are always executed when there are witnesses around to see it unfold. Slowly recovering from his mortifying trauma he'd probably never leave down, Edward turned his golden gaze towards his sister as his eyes darkened. What are you doing here? He spat out, bitterly. Naruko's mirthful smile turned into an angry frown. She marched up to her younger brother and gave him a headbutt he'd be feeling for weeks. Ow! Ed screeched in pain, holding his head. What was that for? Exclamation mark. Quote. That's for worrying me, you moron. Naruko yelled, angrily. She kneeled down, so that she was at eye level. Look, Ed, I know that you don't trust me. I know that I hurt you, hurt the family. I know that I can't say sorry, and expect everything to return to how it used to be when we were kids. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to try. Like it or not, I'm sticking around, so you better get used to it, Datbeo. Quote. She held Ed's face in her hands, which caused him to glower at her. After all, you're my precious, baby brother. She cooed, pulling Ed into a tight hug, practically crushing him. You are just so precious. Quote. The blonde Uzumaki started jumping and spinning him around, like an eccentric mother. Ed, on the hand, felt nauseated as the world was spinning so fast he hardly make out any color or shape. He could feel his wounds reopening. He was dreading the thought of his sister turning into another Hughes. Naruko. Winry called out to the overexcited, older blonde. I think you should put Ed down now. Cerulean eyes blinked in confusion. Why? Quote. Because he's turning green. At the mechanic's statement, Naruko glanced down at her younger brother to see that she was right. Ed did look like he was the verge of vomiting. She quickly laid Edward back down on his bed while apologizing profusely. By the way, Naruko spoke, glancing around the room. Where is Al? Quote. I don't know, Winry answered, looking slightly worried. I haven't seen him. Naruko was starting to get concerned. I'm going to go look for him. She raced out the room before she could hear anyone protest against her. It wasn't long before Naruko found her youngest brother sulking in a dark corner a few blocks away from Edward's room. Al, she called out, hesitantly. She doesn't know what caused her brother to become so sad after he was overcome with anxiety and joy after seeing her the other day. What happened in one night that caused Ed to be hospitalized and Al to become so depressed? It hurts her because she wasn't there to protect her baby brothers. Alphonse lifted his helmet head slightly when he felt the seat next to him shift a bit. Oh, hey, sister, he let out a half-hearted greeting when he noticed it was Naruko taking up the seat next to his. Naruko frowned. Something was really bothering Al. Sup, Al? I just came visiting Ed. Al threw her a questioning gaze. How did you know Ed would be here? Quote. People lie to talk. A lot, she replied, vaguely. Anyway, I went over, gave Ed a smacking and a lecture, and that hug he owes me, Datbeo. Let's just say, be the end of it, he would be seeing blue and green for a while. Alphonse gave out a small laugh, which caused Naruko to frown even more. He was practically expected it to sound lighthearted, but it just came out hesitant and forced. They stayed there for an uneasy moment of silence. You know, the blonde Uzumaki started. If something bothering you, Al, I'm always here to listen. No. That's okay, sister. I'm fine, he smiled, which she immediately knew was fake. Naruko sighed and stood up from her seat. She knew neither her brothers would tell her anything. They were so stubborn. Such stubborn boys. She could partially consider the fact that they thought whatever they were hiding were much too dangerous for her to know. She gave her youngest brother one last hug. Just try to stay safe, okay? Don't forget I'm always going to be here for you as well as Edward and Winry. She sent him one last smile before turning away and leaving. Naruko. A gentle, motherly voice called out. Come on out. It's time for dinner. Quote. A shy, little girl about the age of 4 poked her head out from behind the door, blue eyes wide with uncertainty. Oh, okay, Naruko spoke, her voice filled with apprehension. She took a tentative step forward, surveying her surroundings as if waiting for someone to jump at her or to yell at her to get out. What are you doing standing there, sweetheart? Naruko glanced up, her blonde pigtails bouncing behind her as the woman's brown hair went to pick her up. The little girl flinched slightly when she felt a pair of hands pick her up. Next thing she knew was that she was gently plopped her down on the chair. She offered the shy girl a gentle smile before walking away to get her food. Naruko peeked through her bangs to see the blonde man staring at her. When they made eye contact, she quickly averted her eyes. Ed was busy finding the table fascinating. The blonde young girl could feel her nervousness and anxiety taking a hold of his trepidation of sweat starting to roll down the back of her neck. Finally, what felt like hours, but was actually only minutes, a plate of steamy roasted chicken and mashed potatoes was set before her. Naruko blinked in bewilderment. Where were the scraps of bread crust, the banana peels, or the leftover vegetables the other kids didn't want to eat? This meal was too delicious, too exquisite. This couldn't be right. It was probably a mistake. Yeah, that's what it was. Maybe Mrs. Elric had made a mistake and had meant the meal for somebody else. Naruko had half the mind to tell the woman about her blunder, but another part of her wanted to hurry and eat the food before she realized her mistake. Naruko. The young girl almost jumped when her name was called. She gazed up to see the woman's green eyes gazing at with concern. "What's wrong, sweetheart? You don't like it?" Quote. Naruko shook her head, afraid if she said anything, she might set the nice lady off. She brought her attention back to her food, staring at it with apprehension. She could still remember the days at the orphanage where she would sit in a corner away from the other kids during meal time. With great uncertainty, she picked up the fork. She tenderly cut out a piece of chicken and popped it in her mouth. She instantly felt the delicious texture of the chicken melt in her mouth. It was so good. Just so good. Naruko. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Trisha asked, her tone laced with panic and worry. She went towards the little girl, picking her up. "Honey, why are you crying?" Quote. Huh. She was crying. Naruko didn't notice the sprays of tears splashing across her face. She didn't realize she was crying. All she thought about was how good the food was. It's so good. It's so good. She decided to tearfully voice that thought to the nice lady, her adoptive mother, who had given her her first real meal, and not just leftover scraps. Trisha smiled kindly, hugging the crying girl. There, she whispered, soothingly, petting the blonde girl's head in a relaxing and motherly way. It was the first time Naruko experienced what a family meal was. Naruko was listening in on the conversation Edward and Alphonse were having with their military friends. She knew it wasn't right to spy, but damn it. She's going to do it anyway. She's not a kunoichi for nothing. Now, what were her dear, little brothers hiding from her? The blonde kunoichi tuned into the conversation. She heard words like, Ouroboros tattoo, Lab 5, Philosopher's Stone, Sacrifice, and Homunculi. She made sure to keep mental checklist of all the important factors. She was guessing that this shadowy tentacle monster she encountered yesterday was one of these homunculi creatures. Naruko bit the inside to keep her anger in check. And these homunculi consider her brothers as sacrifices. Exclamation mark. It took all her willpower not to scream and create a hole in the ceiling, which is where she was residing. More precisely, in the air vent. She knew her big sister instinct was kicking in as she just wanted to kidnap Ed and Al, and leave the country. Take them to Konoha where they would be safe, guarded, and protected until she annihilates every last homunculi. She silently removed the vent that was blocked, and jumped down landing behind her little brothers without uttering a single noise. Nobody noticed she was now literally in the room, listening them discuss on how to deal with the fifth lab problem. Not even the guy with glasses or the tall mustached guy detected her, too engrossed in strategizing their next move. The blonde Uzumaki felt a mixture of pride and disappointment coil inside. Pride in her skills as a kunoichi. Man, sneaking was really easy. All those espionage and infiltration missions do come in handy. Even though she's more of Tai who would scream first, ask questions later, she could extremely sneaky if she wanted. Disappointment in regards to the people in front of her. If she was a real assassin, she could take them all out in an instant without them noticing what happened. They shouldn't leave their backs open and unguarded. And they call themselves professionals in the military. She decided to finally make her presence known after 15 minutes of listening in. Naruko leaned over Ed's shoulder to get a look at some sort of crude drawing. Looks like a drawing of a 5-year-old. Whoever drew those does not have any artistic talent. What's this? Some kind of strategy meeting? Naruko questioned with a raised brow. As expected, the men around let out startled yelps as they turned to face her with eyes wide with shock and bewilderment. Sister! Exclamation mark. Alphonse was the first to speak, his voice trembling so much with dumbfoundment that, if he had his real body, his heart would instantly burst. No doubt the others felt the same way. Where on earth did you come from? Exclamation mark. Quote. Naruko gave him a playfully confused look. I've been standing here for 15 minutes. After getting over his initial shock, Edward glared at her, gold eyes full of skepticism. There was no way she was standing there for 15 minutes without any of them discovering an extra person in the room. Before Ed could proclaim the falsehood of Naruko's statement, the door gently burst open. Führer King Bradley! Exclamation mark. Everybody, except Naruko, exclaimed, flabbergasted when a man in his late 60s wearing an eye patch entered the room. Hello, Fullmetal, the man greeted with a disgustingly fake smile that made the blonde woman's skin itch. I heard that you were in the hospital, so I thought a nice melon might cheer you up. Even without Kurama's chakra and enhanced ability to sense negative emotions, she could tell that the man's voice was full of mockery, malice, and venom, eyeing her brother as a mere tool and not a person. So, this was the leader of Amestris. PFF'd. From what she could tell, he was nothing more than a glorified serial killer. How could people be blind to follow a man like him? He obviously couldn't care less if he sacrificed his own men, if it meant obtaining his goal. Just the thought of this guy being leader of the country absolutely pissed her off. It was spitting on the fact of what a true leader was supposed to be. A leader was supposed to be the pillar of support for their people, and wouldn't hesitate to give up their life if it meant protecting their loved ones and country, just like her father, the fourth Hokage. This man was the complete opposite of that, and it pissed the blonde Kunoichi off so much that she could feel her blood boil and her teeth grinding so hard, she was afraid they would crack. Ah. And who might you be, miss? Quote. Naruko was snapped out of her musing to see the Führer greeting her with that infuriating fake smile of his. She relayed her options. There was no way she could attack the guy unprovoked, so she opted to just simply smile and greet him back. Oh, hi, the blonde Uzumaki greeted back. My name is Naruko Elric. She made a mental note to call herself Naruko Elric, instead of Naruko Uzumaki, since coming here. Don't want anyone looking too into her background or cause suspicion. What's your name, old man? Quote. A blonde eyebrow rose in confusion when she noticed everyone giving her looks of disbelief. What? Quote. The Führer let out a hearty laugh. You certainly are an interesting girl. Elric, huh? Are you by chance related to Fullmetal? Quote. The blonde woman resisted the urge to glare the revolting Amestris leader. Behind that friendly exterior, she could tell he was plotting something. Why, yes. I'm their older sister. I haven't been around much, she answered. She figured there was no point in hiding her relationship with Ed and Al. After all, they couldn't touch her, even if they wanted to. She's not an ordinary woman. So, what's an old geezer like you doing visiting my brother in the hospital? Quote. Naruko resisted the urge to smirk when she saw the man's eyebrow twitch. There was something sadistically satisfying about getting under this guy's skin. She let out a surprised yelp when she was instantly yanked back. Confused cerulean blue eyes glanced over to see Edward glowering at her, angrily, looking at her as if she has gone insane. "Are you crazy, Naruko?" Exclamation mark. He whispered, harshly in her ear. "You can't talk to the Führer like that. Do you want to get killed?" Exclamation mark. Quote. She nodded, dumbly, resisting the urge to roll her eyes as she watched Alphonse apologize profusely on her behalf. She scoffed and crossed her arms. Whatever. She went over to the far side of the wall away from the military men. Edward gave his sister one last scolding glare before rejoining the other men. What was she thinking? Talking to the Führer with such blatant disrespect. As if she was challenging him. Doesn't she know that the Führer could revoke his state alchemist license? 10 minutes of hearing the discuss the collapse of Lab 5, and Naruko was deathly bored. "I've got spy network working for us," King Bradley informed them. "But these damn people always seem to be one step ahead of us." Blue eyes narrowed in suspicion. Spy. Does he mean that shadowy monster she encountered the other day? The blonde Kunoichi wasn't an idiot. The so-called leader of Amestris was giving off the same bloodthirsty aura as that homunculus. Trust no one. And when the time comes, I expect you to fight by my side. Okay. It was time she stepped up and called this guy out on his bullshit. She doesn't trust that could potentially endanger her younger brothers, especially not this man. This glorified mass murderer. We'll keep that in mind. So, are you done with all your lies? Quote. Everyone turned wide-eyed at a smirking Naruko. Edward was glaring at her, signaling her to keep quiet while Alphonse was looking at the Führer, frighteningly, probably hoping she didn't offend him in any way. Lies. The Führer questioned, trying to give off that sickeningly insincere smile of his. I assure you, Ms. Elric, everything I tell you is the complete truth. You are lying right now, she bit back, smoothly. When you talk, you use empty words. Tell me, have you been rehearsing that line over and over to yourself? She questioned with absolute mockery. When you said, to fight by your side, you really meant, these mindless fools don't know that they are being used, am I wrong? Quote. Naruko took note of the Führer's twitching hand. She blatantly spoke out that she noticed that. Oh. Your hand's twitching. Are you itching to grab your sword? Are you so angry that you would kill me out of spite? She let out a laugh full of mockery, not caring if others looked at her with dumbfoundment or disbelief, wondering she was truly insane. The great Führer King Bradley killing an innocent girl just because he was having a temper tantrum. My, I wonder how would that affect your image? The image that the Führer is nothing more than temper tantrum throwing mass murderer. Quote. Naruko. Shut up. Edward hissed at her, scathingly. You really should listen to your brother, young lady, the Führer spoke, but she could clearly hear the underlining fury in his tone. The blonde Uzumaki didn't know why she was enjoying getting this old geezer riled up. Many it was the fact that she was viciously attacked by that homunculus creature last night, and she was looking for some way to blow off steam. Or maybe she was pissed that her vacation was kind of ruined. Or maybe it was some sort of sadistic pleasure at seeing the Führer squirm under her accusations because, deep down, he knows she's right. Not to mention that he gives off the same type of presence as that tentacle monster. Besides, the fact that he considers himself someone to be feared, someone who is above her, is utterly laughable. She has faced guys 10 times more, no 100 times more threatening than this bastard. Madara Uchiha and Kagaya Otsutsuki are prime examples. Hell, even Orochimaru is more a threat this old man. Naruko rose her hands up in mock surrender. Okay. I'm sorry. She threw her hands down, dramatically. So, about your so-called spy network. Are you talking about the person watching us from the shadows? She let out a dramatic, jabbing her thumb towards the window. Or the one standing behind the window. Quote. The blonde woman let out a faint, sadistic smirk when she saw King Bradley's visible eye narrow and a breathless gasp coming from outside. A spy. Pathetic. They really should train to hide their presence better. She could practically feel the malice coming off in waves. The silence was tension and deadly for the other occupants in the room. They could feel room turning 50 degrees colder. It was completely unbearable. The atmosphere was so tense a knife could cut it. Is King Bradley here? Quote. They tensed up when someone was calling the Führer's name. Damn, bodyguard. Always thinks he's my shadow, the Führer hissed, perhaps more viciously than he imagined when she saw that snot-nosed woman giving him another victorious smirk. Bradley headed towards the window, not before giving Naruko a murderous glare. Come to my office, Ms. Elric, he commanded, leaving no room for argument. I like to have a little chat. That nonchalant shrug she gave him infuriated him even more. Oh, how wished he could silence her right then and there. Put the useless trash out of his misery. But alas, he had work to do. He could always finish off the arrogant broad anytime he wished. It would be that hard to hide the body and to pin the blame on someone else. So, he climbed out the window and leisurely walked away, leaving everybody, except Naruko, once again in a state of shock and disbelief. Winry had such uncanny timing because as soon as the Führer was gone, she burst through the door. Although, the sight was greeted with was not something she was expecting. Naruko was lazily leaning against the wall with a pleased smirk on her face. Edward was murderously glaring at her, looking as if he wanted to strangle her. Alphonse looked like he was about to have a heart attack, and Hughes and Armstrong were completely dumbstruck. What happened? Winry asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Edward gave his stupid sister one last glare before turning his attention towards Winry. Nothing, Winry, he replied, although, he couldn't keep the anger out of his tone. Did you get the tickets? Quote. Yep. Sure did. The blonde mechanic happily chirped, although, she didn't tell him about the extra one she got for his sister. Naruko. What the hell are you doing here? Exclamation mark. Quote. Naruko pouted innocently at her baby brother. I didn't tell you. I'm coming with you, Datbeo. Quote. Well, you're not coming. Edward all but screamed at her. His older sister tapped her finger against her chin. Well, that's too bad because Winry already bought me a ticket. She exclaimed, happily, holding up the tiny piece of paper. Winry. Ed sputtered, turning around to give his mechanic a look of utter betrayal. "Oh, how exciting!" Alphonse cried out with joy. "Sister, our first trip together." Quote. Winry sighed at the two arguing siblings, already feeling a headache coming on. But she had to agree with Al. It was nice to have Naruko here with them again. Chapter 6. First Kiss. Ugh. Can you believe the nerve of that woman? Exclamation mark. Quote. King Bradley leisurely walked back to his office, hands clasped behind his back with a transformed Envy angrily stalking next to him, ranting about Naruko's disrespect and mockery. How could let a stupid human talk down to you like that, Wrath? Exclamation mark. Envy snarled. Wrath opened the door to his office and Envy followed him in, practically slamming the door shut behind him. I swear. When I see her, I'm going to slaughter her. How dare a filthy human like her talk down to us homunculi? Quote. So you guys really are homunculi? Quote. Envy nearly jumped out of his skin at the unexpected feminine voice in the room. Wrath was better than his brother at hiding his surprise, but his body tensed up slightly. That infuriating woman was there, perched nonchalantly on the open windowsill. The way she sat there, so bored and uninterested, irritated Envy to no end. How did you get inside my office, Ms. Elric? Bradley asked, calmly assessing the blonde woman. He was just itching to slice the woman in half. The female Uzumaki offered a sly grin. That's a trade secret, old man. Envy could already feel his blood boiling at this arrogant human's cold dismissal. He watched with dark, narrowed as the woman exited herself off the window, taking a few unhurriedly paces to stand in front of Wrath, casually crossing arms her chest. That look of boredom and indifference on her face was really pissing him off. What is that you want? Wrath asked, suspiciously, his visible eye narrowing at the blonde kunoichi. Naruko let out a nonchalant roll of her shoulders. Nothing, really. Aren't you the one who called me into your office? Quote. King Bradley tsked under his breath. He could begrudgingly admit that the woman got him there. However, she was undeniably stupid to show up alone and unarmed. Yes, I did, he answered, subtly signaling towards Envy. Recognizing Wrath's sign, Envy's lips graced into a cruel smirk, his dark purple eyes eyeing the female Uzumaki with immense malice. This was too perfect. Now that Wrath's got her attention, he could easily sneak behind her and snap her neck. He watched the exchange between Wrath and the female human, carefully keeping an eye on her. He crept as quickly as a mouse, making sure not to make even a sound. This was too easy. Humans are such pathetic, vulnerable creatures. You should really think about upgrading your security. If you do, she let out a startled yelp mid-sentence as she was grabbed from behind. What was that about buffing up security? Envy gleefully threw the question right back at her. The look of utter surprise on her face was absolutely delicious. His grip on her tightened to an uncomfortable degree. It's useless to struggle, Envy spoke, obviously enjoying tormenting the poor kunoichi. He transformed into a blade and held it dangerously close to her neck, positioning it so he would be able to slit her throat at a moment's notice. Hey! Much to his irritation, the blonde woman didn't seem the least bit worried for her life. So, you guys are monsters in human disguise, she said, more a statement than a question. What was with this human? Why wasn't she scared? He practically had a blade just inches away from her neck. Shouldn't she be panicking, screaming for help? Or so terrified she'd be begging for her life? Naruko craned her neck to take a glance at her capture. He didn't look like anyone special. In fact, he was so ordinary that his only characteristics he had, besides being able to transform limbs, was that he was extraordinary ordinary. That dumbfounded look on his face was just ridiculous. Hey, you have a hostage. Or you just stand there like an idiot? Naruko questioned with an innocent tilt of her head. Envy's teeth gritted at the woman's sarcasm. She was obviously making fun of him. Why you? Quote. You are the woman that Pride spoke about. King Bradley spoke, cutting Envy off. Pride. A flashback of her fight with that tentacle monster flashed before her eyes. That's that shadow creature's name then, huh? She smirked. Thanks, I'll remember that. I suggest you watch your mouth, human, Envy hissed, drawing his bladed arm closer to her neck, breaking skin and drawing out blood. You don't want me to suffer that pretty, little head of yours, do you? Quote. You're not killing the sister of a state alchemist, are you? Naruko inquired, mockingly. We won't kill Fullmetal or his brother, the Führer responded, evenly. We need them both alive. However, he narrowed his eyes at the blonde woman, giving her a look full of malicious intent. Quote. There's nothing we need you for. As if on cue, Envy sliced his bladed arm through the woman's head, watching with sadistic glee as her head separated from her body. Unfortunately for him, instead of the usual splash of blood he was expecting to see spraying from her neck, there was a poof sound, followed by a cloud of smoke to reveal a simple log split in two. What the? Exclamation mark. Envy practically screamed in flabbergasted and alarmed. Wrath was just as astonished as his brother was. He's been watching her with his ultimate eye. When did she had time to replace herself with a log? No, how could she replace herself when Envy was holding her hostage? Wow. That's the second time I had to use a substitution jutsu. Both homunculi tensed and craned their body around to see that irritating blonde woman leaning against the bookshelf. You homunculi are easy to fool, Naruko chuckled. She leaned off the shelf and placed one hand on her hip in playfully wicked manner. What was that about killing me? Quote. She laughed, mockingly at them. Don't make me laugh. You know how arrogant you sound. Don't overestimate your own abilities without realizing the depths of my own. I could take you guys both out without even breaking a sweat. You're lucky that I won't. At least, not yet. I'm not in that kind of mood right. Besides, this room is too crowded and there's too many people in this building. Envy gritted his teeth, completely enraged at this human's constant mockery of them. Shut up, you damn human. Who the hell do you think you are to talk down on us like that? Exclamation mark. Quote. Naruko Simple gave him a wry smile. Who me? Oh, I'm no one special really. She casually stuffed her hands in her pockets. I don't like to flaunt myself. I'm not that type of woman. I only came here just to warn you. Blue eyes turned icy cold and both homunculi felt fear for the first time as a wave of killing intent washed over them. It felt like someone was holding a knife over their neck as they stood, frozen in place. I've got connections. I'm very important to a lot of people. I'll just simply cut to the chase instead of rambling on. If I were to die, she smirked, cruelly. Quote. Let's just say that you would have about half of the world wanting all you homunculi, or whatever the hell you call yourselves, dead. The blonde kunoichi wasn't bluffing when she said this. It was the cold truth. She expected if something happened to her, no doubt Kakashi-sensei would send some people from Konoha to investigate, probably people like Sakura and Shikamaru and maybe Sasuke, if he took time off from his self-redemption journey. Not mentioned she's close friends with Gaara, so no doubt he'd send some sand shinobi if Kakashi-sensei asked him to. Speaking of that, she's friends with Killer Bee, the Hokage's brother, so maybe even he might pitch in. She glared, viciously. If you touch one hair on my brother's head again, I'll kill you all. She spoke with such iciness in her voice it sent shivers down in both Envy's and Wrath's spine. They never met a human who could such fear into their beings. Consider that a warning. We'll got to go. With a wave of her hand, she disappeared into a puff of smoke. After their initial fright and shock dissipated, Envy growled, murderously, completely infuriating, his blood boiling. That bitch. He slammed his fist through the table, shattering it. Naruko slowly opened her cerulean blue eyes from her short nap when a flash of her shadow clone's memories zipped past her mind. A sweet-smelling scent wafted into her nose. What's that smell? She asked, almost drooling at the delectable scent. She stretched her tired limbs a bit. Her blue eyes glanced over at the apple pie laid out on Winry's lap. Glad to see you're awake, sister, Alphonse spoke, noticing his sister stirring from her sleep. How was your nap? Quote. Naruko smiled at her brother, ignoring the calm temptive way Edward was looking at her. It was good. Here's a slice of apple pie, Winry said, happily setting a piece of the pie on plate, and handing it to the older blonde with a fork. Thanks, Winry. Naruko cried out with gratitude, taking a huge chunk of the humble pie. She hummed in delight at the delicious flavor. Whoever made this did an outstanding. One of the best pies I ever tasted, Datbeo. Quote. The blonde mechanic giggled. I'd be sure to tell Gracia you enjoyed her pie, Naruko, once I get back to Central. Naruko nodded her, cheerfully. Please do. Oh, and ask her make me another one. There's no need for that, Naruko, I could bake the pie for you, Winry assured. Cerulean blue eyes sparkled with joy. Really? Awesome. Datbeo. Quote. Winry smiled at the older woman's joyful glee, then turned her attention towards Edward. Why are you guys going to Dublith? She asked, curiously. What do you plan to find there? Quote. Well, we are planning to meet our teacher, Edward replied. Naruko raised an eyebrow at that. Teacher. Quote. Yeah, our alchemist teacher, Alphonse responded this time. She taught us everything we know about fighting and alchemy, Ed added. Wait. So, you guys are only going to fight? Exclamation mark. Winry yelled, indignantly. Not just to fight. Ed yelled back. We are also going to ask her about the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone. Naruko thought, intrigued. She taught us everything we know about alchemy, but she never mentioned the Philosopher's Stone, Ed continued. What's your teacher like, Ed? Winry asked, interested. Her question caused both Ed and Al to pale considerably. Time to say our prayers, Al, Ed moaned, miserably. I wish I had a girlfriend before I died, Al whimpered. Naruko hummed, tilting her head in curiosity. You've never had a girlfriend before, Al? She asked, strangely interested in her brother's love life or lack of. A sly smile formed on her lips. That means you have never been kissed. Wah. Alphonse stuttered. You know, Naruko started making smooching sounds, causing Al to blush. She didn't a suit of armor could blush. Knock it off, Naruko. Edward snapped, angrily. Quit teasing, Al. Quote. Sorry, Al, the blonde kunoichi apologized, sheepishly. She turned her mischievous blue eyes turned her other brother. How about you, Ed? Got a girlfriend you want your dear sister to meet? Quote. She watched with great amusement as Ed's face turned as red as a tomato. Teasing her brothers was such fun. Especially, Edward. He's so easily flustered. So, you haven't kissed girl either, huh? Naruko grinned, playfully. Ed's face flushed a brighter shade of red. His sister sighed. And here I thought you and Winry would get together. So, you guys still haven't sealed the deal. Quote. It was Winry's turn to blush. Shut up, Naruko. Edward shouted, angered and flustered. Winry isn't my girlfriend. And what about you? Have you kissed anyone? Quote. Naruko instantly froze, wide-eyed. She never expected the question and teasing to backfire on her. Memories of her first kiss flashed before her eyes. Her first kiss, with Sasuke. She turned her head away from their prying eyes, not to see her blushing face. She mumbled something inaudible under her breath. Hey! Edward yelled, exasperatedly. Don't turn your head away, Naruko. Huh? You haven't been kissed either. Quote. Naruko craned her head back towards her younger brother, a fire dancing in her cerulean blue eyes. Don't compare myself to you, little brother, she replied, feeling insulted. Unlike you, I have kissing experience. Quote. A sound of collective gasps resounded around. The blonde Uzumaki realized her slip-up and instantly covered her mouth, her cheeks taking on a red tint in embarrassment. Winry was the first to react, giggling in glee. Oh. She cooed. You got a boyfriend, Naruko. Quote. Naruko shook her head, frantically. He's not my boyfriend. We just a couple of times. It was all accidents. She hastily added on when she noticed the playfully sly looks she was getting, feeling even more flustered. Winry squealed with delight. Who is he? She was so interested in the boy who was Naruko's first kiss. And they have kissed a few times, according to her. The blonde kunoichi blinked for a second, her mind going a million miles a minute. She let out a small smile. His name is Sasuke Uchiha, she spoke. There was a gentle fondness in her voice. Sasuke Uchiha? Edward inquired. Weird name. Never heard of it. What's he like? Alphonse asked, curiously. Naruko smiled, happy that her brothers and friend were interested in her old teammate. Talking about Sasuke always made her feel somewhat giddy now that she could talk about him without feeling a cloud of agony and regret aching in her heart. She hummed in thought. Well, let's see, Sasuke is what might call a cool genius. He's considered a child prodigy, but he's a bit of loner. We were classmates. He was the smartest person in class, always scoring the top of class. He was popular with the girls, too. So popular, in fact, that he had his own fan club. Edward, Alphonse, and Winry all listened with rapt attention. Girls always go for the mysterious, bad boy types. Sasuke never cared for his fan club. In fact, he found them to be extremely annoying and nothing but nuisances. He was arrogant and aloof, never wanting to socialize with other people. He was very prideful, so prideful that asking for help him always frustrated him in the beginning. What can I say? He's brutally honest, not really caring if what he's saying hurts someone's feelings or not. I remembered one time a girl asked him, she ended up brutally rejected, running off in tears. She paused for a second, letting the fond memories of their days in the academy and their eventual graduation and companionship during the formation of Team 7 flashed in her mind. Sasuke and I always used to hate each other. We never really gotten along. I never liked him. I thought he was an arrogant jerk, nothing but a stuck-up bastard. We always competed against one another. Neither of us could stand losing to the other. We were stubborn that way. Eventually, we learned to begrudgingly respect each other's strength. That respect turned into a genuine friendship. I learned that Sasuke may be a bastard, but he had a nice side, too. He's kind and thoughtful, even if he has a funny way of showing it. He has a rough exterior, but he's a good guy deep down. Wow. Sounds like you really like this guy, sister, Al observed. Naruko instantly jumped out of her seat in a panic. What? Exclamation mark. She gasped out, feeling flustered. Don't be ridiculous, Al. We are just friends, nothing more. She quietly sat back down, her lips turned downward into a small frown. And besides, our relationship. Just shut up for once. What the hell do you know about it? Exclamation mark. It's not like you ever had a family in the first place. You were on your own right from the beginning, what makes you think you know anything about it? Exclamation mark. Huh. Exclamation mark. I'm suffering now because I had those ties. How on earth could you possibly understand what it feels like to lose all that? Quote. It's. If you attack Konoha, I will have to fight you. So save up your hatred and take it all on me. I'm the only one who could take it. It's the only thing I can do. I will shoulder your hatred and die with you. Quote. Complicated. The rest of them all blinked in confusion as Naruko turned her away, looking out towards the window, wanting to end the conversation before getting into details she'd rather not discuss, her right clenching her shirt where her heart laid where her Chidori-induced scar was. I figured you know why I called you back to Konoha. The young raven-haired man stared at his former teacher, merely raising an elegant brow. I heard that it was about Naruko. The laid-back Hokage leaned back against his chair. Why, yes. Not long ago, I sent Naruko to a country called Amestris. Amestris? The raven-haired man inquired, testing the foreign word on the tip of his. It's a country far off to the east, past the land of lightning. It's across the ocean, so you have to get there by boat, the silver-haired man explained. Why is Naruko in this country? The black-haired man questioned. I sent her here for her vacation. She wanted to go there. Apparently, she has family. 2 younger brothers, to be more precise, the Hokage answered. That reply left the younger man confused. Family. Naruko had never told him of any siblings. Everyone, including himself, just assumed that she was an orphan. He didn't know what to think about her lying to him all these years. He felt kind of hurt. I know that you are skeptical. I was, too, at first. I went through the third Hokage's files to find that it was really true. Naruko does have siblings living in Amestris. Adopted brothers to be more accurate. Apparently, Naruko was adopted by the Elric family at a young age, but returned here when it was time to begin her career as a shinobi. Seeing as most of questions were being confirmed, the dark-haired man replied with his follow-up question. Why do you want me to go over there to Amestris? Quote. The silver-haired Hokage leaned forward, his dark gray eyes sharp. Apparently, Naruko has run into a little trouble while vacationing. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a letter. That girl always seems to find trouble wherever she may be. He handed it over to the younger gentleman. The black-haired man held out his only arm and gracefully opened the letter, reading its content. His face contorted for a split second of one of amusement and exasperation before forming back to its usual aloof look. The letter was definitely from Naruko. The messy handwriting was a dead giveaway. She finds trouble even on her time off. I assume you already know what to do. The man silently nodded his head. Good. You are to head out to Amestris and help Naruko solve this issue. When do I leave? Quote. There's a boat that heads over there tomorrow morning, so leave then. The sooner, the better. The raven-haired young man nodded his head in affirmation once more and headed out the door of Hokage's office, knowing that his business with his former teacher was done. Good luck, Sasuke. Automail. 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 Quote. The trio siblings watched as Winry gushed about Automail with varying degrees of exasperated expectancy. We should just leave Winry here in this town of Automail freaks and head over to Dublith, Edward Said, irritable, impatient, tapping his foot against the pavement as the blonde mechanic went into another shop, gashing about the mechanics of Automail. That's the price you pay, Ed, to satisfy your girlfriend, Naruko teased. Edward's cheeks instantly flushed pink in embarrassment. Damn it, Naruko. Winry is not my girlfriend. Quote. Naruko innocently tilted her head, although, she enjoyed teasing her little brother and making him all flustered. She should be. She patted his back roughly. She would make you a nice wife, she laughed, heartily. Well, what about you and this, Sasuke, guy? Ed retorted. The older sibling immediately stopped laughing to address her younger brother with a look of suspicion and confusion. What about me and Sasuke? Quote. Isn't he your boyfriend? Edward baited, slyly. His sister promptly froze up, her face heating up. Be boyfriend, datbeo! Exclamation mark. She exclaimed in disbelief. Ed had an evil glint in his eyes. Oh, yeah. He challenged, tauntingly. I wouldn't call kissing a guy being just friends. He needed so payback from all of Naruko's teasing. And if he had to stoop as low as her, so be it. I told you it was an accident. Naruko retorted, feeling incredibly flustered. He scoffed, not believing her. I wouldn't call kissing a guy more than once to be all accidents. Well, they are. Datbeo. Quote. Alphonse watched with a tired sigh as his siblings got into another heated argument. They were both so stubborn and hot-headed. But their quarrel did bring him a sense of nostalgia. It brought him back to the days when they were all together like family with mom. Even though their mother was no longer here, it's still like their family was back together. He was abruptly startled out his musings when he heard an excited squeal. What's got you all excited? Edward yelled, angrily, covering his ears. That unexpected screech didn't do his eardrums any favors. Naruko didn't answer as she bounced away gleefully to whatever caught her attention. She pressed her face against one of the shop's window view where they show their latest products. Her entire body was radiating with joy as there were hearts in her cerulean blue eyes as she gazed, dazzlingly at the sword in full display. Awesome! 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 Naruko chanted, happily. Edward and Alphonse over their elder sister's shoulders to see what got her squealing like a girl on a shopping spree. When they saw that it was a simple katana encased in elegantly patterned black and blue sheath, they shared looks of utter disbelief and bewilderment. This sword is awesome. So cool. Beautiful. The female Uzumaki cooed, delightfully. Sister. I didn't know you were into that kind of stuff, like weaponry, Alphonse uttered, sheepishly, not knowing what to say. This was something new about their sister. Ignoring him, Naruko spun around and faced Edward with a pleading stare. Ed, please buy it for me. She requested, pointing an excited finger at the katana. Ed crossed his arms, scowling. Why should I? Quote. His sister pouted, cerulean blue eyes growing unbearably wide, giving him the puppy dog look. Please, buy it. Quote. The Fullmetal Alchemist scoffed and turned away. No way. Why don't you buy it yourself? I don't have enough money, she pouted, shamefully. Well, sucks to be you, he responded, uncaringly as he began walking away. Edward. Naruko fumed. You stupid, short idiot. Quote. Tick's marks instantaneously sprang all over Ed's head as he spun around so fast, it was amazing his whole upper back didn't snap. Who are you calling short? Exclamation mark. He exploded. Alphonse sighed once again as his two older siblings got into yet another fight. The sight of a gathered crowd grabbed his attention. He strolled away to see what all the commotion was. Noticing Al's disappearance, Naruko ceased her argument with Ed to address it. Hey, where did Al go? Quote. Edward's blonde brows scrunched together in confusion, his golden gaze searching for his little brother. Where did he go? Quote. I don't know. He was here a minute ago. Cerulean blue eyes spotted a familiar tall suit of armor amidst a crowd of people. There. She pointed towards the crowd. Al's there. Edward, having spotted his brother as well, immediately ran off towards the large group of people to join him, his older sister not far behind him. When they regrouped, Winry was already there standing next to Alphonse. Naruko watched uninterested as it was just a simple automail arm wrestling match. The whole entire premise was boring. Why don't they skip the kiddie stuff and do some actual sparring? She observed with dry amusement as Edward was easily riled into competing in the arm wrestling competition by the announcer making fun of his height. She sighed in hopelessness. Her brother really needed to fix that complex of his. If he was a shinobi, enemy ninjas were use it against him and kill him. Although, she'd die before she let that happen. Edward decided to teach these bastards a lesson for calling him a pipsqueak. He would show them that this pipsqueak was not someone to mess with. A victorious smirk graced his lips as he completely totaled the bulky dude's automail. Let's try that again, whose automail is a pile of trash? He said, rhetorically with a mocking tone. My automail is the best. Winry cheered, happily. No sooner a large crowd of automail mechanics gathered around Ed to admire and praise the craftsmanship of his automail. Winry wasted no time to bask in the glory and proudly proclaim that she was the wonderful mechanic that made the blonde alchemist automail. Al chuckled to himself as he watched Edward's patience wearing thin and Winry obliviously glorying the work of her automail. "This takes you back, doesn't it, sister?" Quote. He turned only to realize that Naruko was gone. Exclamation mark. While Edward was busy with arm wrestling, Naruko decided to entertain herself with the children of Rush Valley. She always adored kids. They were so full of life and endless potential. They were seeds of the next generation. The easiest and simplest way she thought of to entertain these little balls of sunshine was to jungle for them. Being a ninja, jungling 5 flaming torches was fairly easy to do. Using a bit of wind chakra to keep the torches airborne and in her control. Not only was this entertaining, but good practice for wind chakra control. The children oohed and awed at her performance while the parents observed, fascinated by the display. For the grand finale, the blonde kunoichi tossed all 5 of the torches and caught each of them on her hands, foot, and nose, perfectly balancing them with wind chakra and each. They onlookers were in complete awe at her performance and graciously applaud her. She tossed the torch that was on her foot up, and smoothly caught in her hand. The one of her nose was already in her other hand. She blew out the fire, distinguishing the torches before tossing them away. That was so cool. Quote. Awesome. Quote. So wonderful. Quote. The children cheered, making Naruko's heart swelled up with joy. Children are always great inspiration. She hoped that they would grow up to be wonderful and aspiring adults. Sister. Quote. The sound of metal hitting the ground and Al's frantic cry caught the female Uzumaki's attention. No sooner, she spotted Al in the distance, closing in on her, inch by inch. He seemed to be troubled for some reason. "What's wrong, Al?" she asked, worriedly. "Sister, you have to help us look." Alphonse cried out, urgently. She tilted her head in confusion, not understanding the dilemma. "Look for what?" Quote. "Ed's pocket watch has been stolen."
Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. My apologies for all those quotes. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night. See you next time, my dear faves.